But it's just a raw feed of like an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
So,
I like it.
yeah. But to cue these up. It's an interesting dynamic with photography that if someone calls me to get something done, they expect me to be on every aspect of the capture
Sure.
at minimum. I have a studio manager and retoucher that retouches everything. You know, he's a technical wizard and an artist in what he does.
Sure.
But if someone were to show up and I weren't there in creating that, there would be a strong like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But with architecture, you can have the head of the firm show up and sell the whole project, but then other people design it, you know, and that's an interesting difference in that whole practice. That
It felt funny to like, I got to a point where, you know, if you're practicing for 18, 20 years, you're facile enough. You can produce a building on your own. But then if you're doing it under someone else's banner, it's their work. And so there's that funny thing, like it's your art and it's the client's art and that's a collaboration. And I experienced this many times where I work with a client and we get to the end of it and it's like, but that's not mine. It's the person whose name is on the door. And that, I don't know if that's wrong or right, but that was a conflict for me for sure. And maybe that's just my ego as an architect or an artist. But I realized that at some point that there had to be another way and something else that I wanted to try. And, you know, my business has just been like a whole series of experiments. You know, fundamentally, it comes down to making things. And making is the act of taking an idea and turning it into a physical reality. And that can happen with architecture. That can happen with a business. Like I found a lot of creativity in just like starting a business.
Like business, the creative approach to business to me is also very valuable.
Yeah.
And I find that I've often got ideas for other businesses going on in the back of my head that I have to keep killing. Right. I'm like, don't get distracted, Trent. This
Shiny
is
object.
What you do. Yeah. Squirrel. Yeah. And we'd strap it down in the back and put it through the moonroof and shoot in downtown New York City of the larger buildings.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, so we'd drive around with basically what looked like a gun turret in the back. And like
pre 9/11?
No, after 9/11. Like no one would blink an eye. Like we did it right in front of a cop station too, double parked. I'm on the roof with this up high, like I don't know, I think they're just used to crazy in New York.
Exactly,
so they're just like, yeah, whatever.
That's awesome.
I made a horrible employee. I could have never worked for someone else. And I would be completely bored if I knew I had a consistent income. Like for me, for some reason, the being on the edge of failure, I intrinsically know that drives me.
You know, the challenge of starting your own thing and really figuring out how to make it. Like there's nothing that makes you grind harder than that. I really miss kind of those early days because I was free to experiment and fail. No one was watching. It felt so like at some level, so liberating. Right. And also, as you say, like really scary because you're responsible for bringing in the same level of income that you had before. And so everything became a creative challenge as opposed to, well, I'm going to get in the car and drive 70 miles to and from work and, you know, just check in, check out.
Clear. It's not an easy thing to make money as a creative and pay for a house and family and kid, you know. What is it about your personality and what are some of the choices you've made, you think, that has made you successful?
I mean, if I were to say one thing, it would just be I relentlessly execute on ideas. And I think a lot of people have a lot of ideas, but that's where it ends. The idea.
How do you pick the ones you're gonna go on? That's a hard thing for me. Like I have a hard time staying on like the one thing that's working for me. It's like, you know,
it gets easier the farther you get into it. But in the beginning, when I was first starting this, I did everything, and like people don't like hearing that because that's not easy. I tried writing, I tried making videos, I tried taking photographs. I tried working, you know, with clients one-on-one. I tried doing consulting. I tried like all these things, right? And what I did was I figured out which ones gave me the most creative energy and the most feedback and the ones where I saw the most potential to leverage my time. Yep. So YouTube ended up being a great confluence of all those things because it's a creative outlet. I get to film architecture. I get to think about editing. I get to learn about cinematography. So there's like this whole headspace in there that I just unlocked. I didn't even know it was there. It's also a way to earn income, and it's a way to promote my business so I can get new clients. It just ended up being this kind of perfect storm to invest in. There's also the financial aspect, right? I mean, this has to work financially. I really struggled hard in the beginning to make it work financially. And I realized that, if I was going to take 10 different clients, small little projects, and get on this hamster wheel of, like you were talking about, addition, renovation, like what's that, 3 or 4 months worth of work, if that, and then I have to find a new client, and it's like all these little things. No, I'm going to wait for big client to come along, good project, nice people to work with. But in order to wait that long, I need to have revenue that's supporting that. So
right.
I did plan sets. I wrote books. I'm doing advertising revenue. I'm doing affiliate, like all this stuff, because I want that to leverage my time so that I can wait for these bigger commissions to come in. That's a more entrepreneurial approach to practice. Most people just say, I'm going to do the client thing. And whatever that looks like, it's going to be a struggle. And I talk to people every week that are in that same position, like, well, how do you do this? And
keep your expenses low, work hard.
Well, that's true. And it's like, it is executing. And I think most people, the execution part, that's where it falls flat.
What you can essentially do with a tighter focal length, you can compress stuff more and it feels more like natural eye. But if you can use a tilt shift, you can get more of the frame. So what you essentially do is you make your vanishing point, the focal point of where your camera is, further back by doing that. So where I could be here and use a 24 and everything would be a little distorted, like you use a 45 and it'll feel like I'm further back.
I see.
So it kind of takes this and it goes like that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So it connects back. Works really well. We have I think a very similar taste in architectural design. What informed that taste? I mean, you probably didn't grow up in a house that looks like your house or this studio. I know I didn't grow up in a house that reflects the house that we were actually able to just finish building finally. Thank you, God.
Great.
But like, what informed your taste? Like for me, at the beginning of architecture, I had this one professor who was insanely just active mind and really excited about what he was doing.
Sure.
And he was from somewhere in Europe, and he had a very kind of more minimal and modernist approach. And I was just like, wow, this is really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I've since found that I just very much gravitate towards minimalism and a modern take with a take on vernacular architecture as well. And like Scandinavian minimalism and that idea of simplicity.
Sure.
Really appeals to me. Where do you think you were informed for your taste on design?
Yeah, I think it's obviously a function of sort of where you come from, what you've sampled, your education, all of your life's experiences, right? It all passes through this filter. And I think, if I look way back, my father was a history professor, a lot of history in my house. He worked at a museum. So I was always accompanying him to museum.
Oh, cool.
He was a photographer. So like I'm always in the workshop with him, seeing old stuff. We grew up in upstate New York, so lots of barns, lots of agriculture. It's a very rural place, not dissimilar to this place, but a huge farming tradition there. So, a love for barns and these big blank walls and these big, vacuous spaces, timber frames, all of those sort of historical elements. But when I come to school, I realize, gosh, there's so much more to architecture than just this sort of historical notion of like what the past, the 1800s has given us, right? New England, they imported the English tradition of barn making, and these sort of colonial homes were all built on that English tradition. Get to school and realize, okay, modern architecture, like there's this complete other world out here, right? And I traveled to New York, but it was nothing that was ever sort of viscerally like important to me. Those buildings seemed very disconnected from my personal experience. But get to school and I realized architecture can look like 1,000 different things. And I think part of the process of going through design school is really sampling all those things and then putting it through your own hand and figuring out what you're actually capable of creating. Like there are things
Right.
that I looked at in school that I thought, my God, this would be so fantastic if I could do that. And I would try to do that and it would fall flat. I mean, I'm
Right.
sure you had this experience. Like everyone wants to do the current trend in architecture. So in school, when I was in school, it was deconstruction and everyone wants to be a decon architect. So it's like these crazy, I mean, you remember that style, I'm sure, is very aggressive and bold design moves. But what you realize is that, part of creating your style is figuring out what your past is, understanding your past, and then figuring out how you're going to move that into the future. And what I realized was that my design process was more of a reductive design process. I was not good at adding things and making it look better. I was always better at taking things away. And so I think, finding a more simplistic style just felt right to me. The more I took away, the better it looked to me. And you always have this like,
I'm doing that with my photography all the time.
Is
It
that
just
right?
feels like
Yeah.
it's a calmer, more able to take the space in, the less that there's in
sure,
it. And it's
yeah.
just kind of I don't know, for me, it just has this feeling of serenity and peace that I can relax in. It's just so hard though when you're at this stage of life and you don't have a trust fund.
I don't have one either, man.
Yeah,
It's a hump. It is for sure. And what I did a video on this one time because I had a bunch of questions, people saying, well, how do you manage to get this done? And I just said that I sleep less because I get up really early and people were not.
When do you typically get up?
I get up at 4.
Really? I did that a little bit last week. Man, I get so much done
I was gonna
between
say.
like 4 and 8. It's like, geez, I've worked a half day and now I'm just going to hang out with the kids for a bit. And
But my thing is like that, I feel like that puts me ahead of everybody else. And it's like a kind of evil little sort of voice in here that's like, yeah, you just lapped like, 1,200 people. And so when people ask me that, it's like, get up earlier. And it's not a popular idea, but it actually does work.
oh no, it totally does work. You can get so much more done in those 4 hours before 8 than you can the rest of the day because the phone's not ringing, the kids aren't coming in, nothing. You can just plow forward. So.
And you pay for it on the other end of the day, I can promise.
What do you see as like, wow, that's good architecture? Like what makes you see something as good when it comes to architecture?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question because I think there are academic answers to this. You and I both went to architecture school, so we know.